Hi, Bill Mobley for UCTV and the Brain Channel, talking again about Alzheimer's disease and the important impact that Alzheimer's has on people in San Diego and around the world. We've interviewed a number of very talented scientists and clinicians, and we need to focus, I think, even more on the impact of this disease in people's lives, the people that have it and their caregivers. And so with me today is Darlene Shiley, a very important local figure whose voice in supporting people with Alzheimer's disease and their caregivers is very loud and very influential and very important. Darlene, thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure, truly my pleasure.
Tell us about you and tell us about your experience as a caregiver, if you will.
You want to know about me? I can do that. Well, I think for a gal that came out of the projects, my family was, I think, a notch above poor and a notch below lower middle class. I did okay in life, and I think largely because of the education system. My family believed very much in the importance of education. That was the only way that you were going to, make a move. And even though you've had scientists here before, you should know I did enter college as a biology major.
Excellent.
Because I was the only girl in the class, in my high school class, that could pith a frog. You have to be very careful about the way you say that. However, when I got to the chemistry class in college, I realized it was either change majors or blow up the entire school. So I went. I've always thought, though, that when I met Donald, that having been a biology major was, probably, I think maybe he saw that in me. I don't know, an interest in it.
Because he was a biologist and an engineer, yes?
But Donald was a biomedical engineer before there were biomedical engineers, I think, and he started out as a hydraulic engineer. But for me to have gone through the process, I looked at law school, I looked at a great many things, and then at a late age, in the late 70s, to be not married at the age of 30 was, I guess they call it old maid at that time, but my mom had told me, wait for the right one, and I did, and wow, I got him. I was a very, very lucky lady. But I think the fact that Donald and I were such a good couple made it easier and harder when it came to his particular illness. Now, Donald didn't have Alzheimer's himself, but he had vascular-related dementia. And as I've said before, I don't care what you call it. When your loved one doesn't know who you are, it's a very depressing moment in time. Now, I had a mother, an uncle, and an aunt, all with Alzheimer's. So I'm very interested in if there is a hereditary aspect. Whenever I forget something, I, practically go catatonic, worried that something's happening. But the caregiver part that you talked about, Bill, I think is particularly important now because there's so many people that are falling into that category. As the baby boomers come up, you find that those people, and I am one of those, you find the people in the middle, kids, people that would be our children, are having to take care of their own families and then try to worry about mom and dad or grandma and grandpa. Right. I think for me with Donald, it was he'd had several, small strokes, but when what we called the last big one hit, we were both, we were on an airplane coming back from Europe, and I knew we were in deep trouble. And the process of caregiving, I think, and everybody needs to understand, you reach a point where the family member can't do it. Yeah. You just can't do it, and you have to call in help. And fortunately, there's help out there. You just have to know where to find it.
Where did you find it, Darlene?
Well, I had I had a slight in from the standpoint that I keep it pretty close because of my mom and other relatives, and on my relationship with UCSD and Donald's. We were involved here with the late, great Leon Thal. And I was on the National Alzheimer's Association and Related Dementias Association, which they fortunately are now keen on because it isn't just one. And Lord only knows how many others there are. You'd be more, able to talk about that than I could. But I found that having sources of information, it's still so painful. It doesn't matter how much money you have. Pain is pain, losing a loved one. In my case, the moment when I realized Donald didn't know who I was fussing around with him and trying to get him straightened around. And he looks at me and says, "You're very nice. Do you work here?" And I thought, you know, shoot me now or shoot me later. But it was an interesting moment. It was that moment when you realize you've lost a particular battle, and there's no going back. I kept trying. I never gave up. I took a couple of his nurses on a cruise with Donald, thinking, I don't know, I guess I thought I could jog it. I wanted Bill to be able to say, I tried everything, and I thought maybe we enjoyed cruising, and you know, maybe it would help. It didn't help him, but if I can just digress for a second, because there is hope, you know, whether you look at it from a scientific standpoint or from a caregiver standpoint. I would, you know, take Donald down to dinner. We'd give him his dinner in the room, and then we'd get him dressed up. And this one night, I let the nurses go off to a luau with the instructions that one of you has to come back not inebriated, so that two of us can get him into bed. And Donald and I went out down to dinner. He was in the wheelchair, and this one woman had been watching us the whole cruise. And I thought, if that woman just makes one more move in my direction, I'm going to take her out. And sure enough, she gets up and she walks over to the table. Now, I am ready. I mean, I'm ready for bear. And to make a long story short, she says to me, you know, she said, I've been watching you with your husband, and I felt like saying, yeah, lady, I know, what's your problem? She says, I've brought my mother on this trip. She's failing. I know she's failing, but I haven't known how to talk to her, to reach her, whatever. She said, and I've been watching the way that you talk to your husband, even though he doesn't talk back to you. She said, I want you to know that I've learned from you. I thought, okay, the trip may be over for us, but this woman has benefited, you know, from it. So I thought, okay, I can live with that. But she was discovering, as many caregivers do, there comes a point where you're going to need some outside help. And whether it's the Alzheimer's Association, whether it's your local university, whether it's a caregiving group, you've got to find somebody to help bolster you up. You're not going to make it.
It's just too hard all alone. It's just too hard. And these are stories. The stories are so important to tell because it's a story of confronting loss and your resistance to allowing the loss to go forward and the ultimate acceptance that this has gone forward, and yet this is a person I still love very deeply, and I'm still committed to them, and I will do what I can for the rest of their life to make things better. Even in the case that it doesn't get all better, or maybe even a little bit better, I've done what I can do. That's
right, as much as you can. Because if you can't say that to yourself, my grandmother, she didn't speak English very well. She's from Portugal and Brazil. But she used to tell me, I call it Grandma's mirror test. She says, you know, at night when you go to bed, you look in the mirror. If you haven't done something good that day and you don't like the person that is looking at you, then you have to do better the next day. I remember when she, initially told me that, I thought, oh, Grandma, cut me some slack. I never said that to Grandma because I wasn't an idiot and she was stronger than I was. But through life, I've learned she's right. And with Donald, I thought I'm not going to make, yes, I'll make mistakes, but I'm not going to not turn over every rock I can. And I think for the caregivers, there's become a part of the caregiving process. We always refer to hospice and, at some particular point. But the palliative care aspect I have found of more interest lately and gotten more involved in that. Special training for nurses and people to deal with people that are terminal in the sense that they don't have all their faculties anymore. Maybe there isn't anything really physically wrong with them, except things are starting to shut down because the brain isn't functioning and things aren't working. But very interesting thing our doctor told me. He said, when I finally decided it was time, I didn't decide, was told it was time for hospice. And I'd been fighting it because I saw that as the last step. And I asked the doctor, I said, well, have I waited too long, to do this? And he says, no, he said, you weren't ready. Not Donald wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. And then I worried, oh my God, I made my husband suffer. He says, no, 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 it's not about suffering. He said, it's about you weren't ready to accept this next step. But I was with him when he passed. I'm not exactly a small-sized person, and the two of us in a hospital bed was, pretty tricky to pull off. But I was there, and the 23rd Psalm was his favorite, so I would recite that to the point of being annoying to myself. But he liked it, and when he took the last breath, I heard it, and they had told me what to expect. I don't know about anybody else, but I was, you watch the movies and people gurgling and all sorts of things. You don't know what to expect, but it isn't. It isn't that way. But you have to be told that, so you know. So the caregiver can benefit from the palliative caregiver, as I refer to them, because I think they are. And they're there, especially in hospice, they're there not just for the patient, but for the caregiver. People, and I think for you to take the time to talk about the caregiving situation is very valuable, because people feel like they're just all alone out there sometimes. It is all about the patient, but at the end of the day, it is going to be about you. When that and the aftermath, when you're filling out the paperwork, one of the questions was, I can't believe it. One of the questions was, what was the mileage on your car on the day of passing? I thought, right, the first thing I did when my husband passed away is I ran out to the car and checked to see what the mileage was so I could report to the IRS to make sure that they got everything that they needed to get. I mean, it's you could do a whole show on post care, because that really becomes something that the caregiver is left with, not just the loss of the person, in my case, the most dear person in the world to me. I mean, Darlene and I we were cool. We were good. For the difference in ages, I think we had the same philosophy of life, and I think ultimately that cuts across the ages.
Talk a little bit more about those months that followed his death, and though he is gone, you've gone on, and you've done new things and different things and very interesting things. Talk about that early time, and then talk about what you've done.
It was really bad. I found when Donald passed, it wasn't a surprise. I mean, some people lose their spouses quickly, but the lack of the tactile, being able, even when he was not, functioning, was riveting to me. Donald and I spent a lot of time holding hands and that sort of thing, and I found that the paperwork things. The story about I can't with form. I forget the number of the form. Form 702. If, when a couple, when one passes, the estate is supposed to pass, but you have to fill out this form. Okay, this form, when you fill out and answer all the questions, when we submitted it, was that thick. And questions like that, questions about jewelry. The one thing Donald had told me, we were in a position that we didn't use insurance, we didn't use Medicare, because we both felt that there were people who really, really needed that, and we wouldn't do that if we didn't need to. It was very expensive, but we both believed that. But Donald said, I paid into Social Security. You get whatever I deserve to have from Social Security. So they call you up and they, ask if you'd like to, discuss qualifying for the death benefit. Death benefit. I thought, I guess that's to help pay for the funeral, whatever. And I thought, I'm not going to do this. Then I thought, Donald said, I have a Post-it note on my computer, two of them. One of them says, what would Donald do? And the other one says, what are you saving it for? Because it was always our plan to give away all of our money. So I thought, okay, Social Security wants that. So she says, would you answer a few questions? Okay, 45 minutes of questions. She says, oh, you've qualified for the death benefit. Oh, wonderful. I said, and how much is that? And she says, well, you'll qualify for the entire $256. And
That's not even a minimum wage, given the time it took for you to...
I told her, I said, you can't buy a floral spray for $256. What is any normal person supposed to do? But she was very earnest, and I'm so sorry for your loss, and she's going on, and then she says, well, let's discuss, what you're entitled to, from Social Security. Anyway, that was an even screwier conversation. At the end of the day, it was clear I was making enough money that I wouldn't qualify for that, and I understood. But all of those things, and you find, and I don't think I'm different from anybody else, when you're forced to go it alone, it's like, okay, I can either fall apart or I can pick up the mantle, if you will, and keep going with what we are doing.
Right.
My initial response was, I don't care about being here much anymore without Donald. Just, not that I was going to do anything about it, but I just wasn't really interested in doing much of anything. A lot of days of, it feels good to sleep until noon. But then I realized, no, I can't do that. I had responsibilities, and more important, I wanted to do the things that Donald and I had talked about us doing,
what he would do.
What he would do, although he always said, when we got married, Donald said, okay, now the plan, is all of our money will go to charitable causes when we die. And I said, terrific, I'm good with that. I said, however, if something happens to me first, could you take care of my mom and her husband? He said, no problem. So about 2 years into our magnificent honeymoon period, which lasted 32 years, I said to Don, is there a reason we have to wait till we drop? I said, can't we do some of this now so we don't, I want to know who we're giving the money to. And he said, because he was brilliant, he said, that's an excellent idea. You take care of that. So I had all sorts of things to do after Donald passed, and I've tried to do that. I've tried to find new ways. I'm about to fund something in palliative care because I think it's important.
Great.
And working as you have with Diane Jacobs, the Board of Supervisors Alzheimer's Project, I found there's still a lot to be done. I want to be a part of that. I want to be positive. I want to be progressive.
You are a part of that, and it's a very important thing to have your energy and enthusiasm and good heart in that process. I'm very thankful to you for being with us, and I want to thank you for your work, for who you are, and for the good things that you have in mind for your future, and for the future of those people who care for people with dementia. Darlene, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill.
Bill Mobley for UCTV and the Brain Channel.